Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to after dark to downtime, and once again we got the fireplace there for McMillan. That's a new thing. We're gonna have to do that every time now for you. So welcome, thank you all for joining us. How you guys doing?
I'm doing great.
Okay.
Xander, how about
It's
yourself?
kind of cold here in Nevada.
Yeah, I'm
Chilly.
just glad you got reception. And you said you were going to be in Las Vegas, which is why I'm glad I did not give you the in-time credit card.
That's probably a wise choice.
Oh dear Lord! There's
Think of the video it would make. Come on, Crazy Eights, or whatever that's you yell at that game with dice. I'm a professional gambler. You can tell.
I don't. Somebody wanted to do. Somebody just did a movie on 𝗫𝐿𝐴, and I know I don't. Okay, and they're now doing a movie on Christian Zionism, and somehow they got my name for someone to talk to about Christian Zionism, and I've discussed it, but it's not. I'm not an expert, but now I got like 3 shows coming up where I'm a guest on to discuss Christian Zionism, and then Tang, the Atheist Network Group, which has their Better conference in Texas, in Fort Wayne, asked me to be a speaker. I was like, oh, great, what's the topic? They said, we'd like you to talk on Christian Zionism. I was like, I don't know why all of a sudden I'm the Christian Zionism guy, but okay.
You are now officially the subject matter expert.
Yeah, and of course you'd think I'd get it right. It's actually Christian nationalism, but Christian nationalism nationalism is the precursor to Christian Zionism, and they're both a certifiable nightmare. But that'll be fun. And the reason I was thinking of that was because we got to this time, as Andrew, we got to find a way to get you down there. We'll have the whole in time team. We'll go down and we'll cause a ruckus because I'm a troublemaker.
Where is it and when? You said down in Fort Worth?
Fort Wayne.
Or Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Why do I?
Someplace with a fort. Okay.
It's one of the forts. I'm always getting somebody's gonna.
So that narrows it down to the U.S.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm
I go everywhere, but I'm not everywhere at once.
Why am I?
Here I was thinking you were omnipresent. My childhood dreams dashed again.
What is the opposite of omni?
Omni is everywhere, so.
Right.
I don't know.
Nowhere.
Well, not
uni, maybe.
Or
One.
nada.
Well, yeah.
Okay, I'm not a present.
Okay, so you're unipresent. So you're only present in one location.
I'm never present for anything ever. Haven't you ever listened to me debate? Come on. I'm clearly not all there.
Oh, that we did. The gun debate was awesome. That was a really good one. Have you thought about doing any like debating or anything like that, or?
Oh God, no. Wait. Let's figure out what side you want to lose, and we'll just put me on that end.
Oh, Jesus!
I love trying to debate because it challenges me to try and, especially on the fly, because you're unless you're like submit plans. Okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. This is what I'm going to bring up. And honestly, if you're going to debate people, I really, on an official capacity type thing, and you want to have a really good debate, you really should give each other the sources of the things that you're going to cite, so that gives them a chance to actually look them up. You go nowhere, and it's not productive when somebody starts quoting a bunch of stuff, and there's like, well, I'm not familiar with any of this stuff. You're quoting these studies, but I'm not doubting that the studies exist, but I'd like to know exactly where they were published, who the authors were, what are the possible conflicts of interests, what was the methodology used, I want to be able to actually physically look at this study, because the study may say exactly what you said it is, but the study could be garbage too. So I see that so many times. It's like, well, I can't respond to that because I don't know anything about this study. So it would be nice if people could give each other all of the sources so that you could be familiar with them. But oftentimes that doesn't happen, and I like being able to. It's mentally stimulating to be able to go on the fly and say, how well do you really know this topic? And it's especially, I can do that with like the gun debate because I've looked at this stuff so many times. I've looked at all of the statistics so many times. But even I'm like, okay, well, it's somewhere around 94%, or it's somewhere around, it's like I can get very close to what the statistic is, but not the exact number on some of the cases. Mm-hmm. So I do enjoy doing that, but I don't know. There just hasn't been a whole lot of. I'm just not in high demand, and I just don't get it. Why doesn't everybody love me?
I think it depends on the kinds of debates you're willing to do and who you want to debate with. I used to debate. I want to get back into it, but it's like who's got the time, and I prep a lot. But there's a few formats on YouTube for debates. But the ones that I know the most about really have devolved often into dumpster fire kind of things, and I'm not.
He who yells loudest and longest wins.
A lot of that, yeah.
My son did debate in high school, and he's in an engineering program right now, and he says it's hilarious because like all the engineers absolutely loathe doing anything that resembles public speaking. So there's always this huge fight when they're doing group projects. Get him. He knows how to talk in public.
That is a pretty important skill.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of the most frequently occurring phobias is the fear of speaking in front of large groups. Huge. I can't remember what it's called, but
well, they say people are often afraid of it more than death. I'm not sure exactly what that means. It's like if you had a choice between public speaking and dying, you'd choose dying. I think it just means that when people talk about their biggest fears, they list that before somebody thinks to list death. But it's people are more afraid of that than death.
His debate team used to, every year they'd have sweatshirts printed up, and one year that was the slogan on the back was, "We only do what others would prefer to die not to do."
That's a good motto. I'm gonna write that one down. Hold on a sec. I think that should be the new In Time motto. I like this one. I like this. This works. Oh dear Lord. I've got I'm glad I don't want to spend too much time on Ukraine. Every time I say that, we end up spending a whole bunch of time on Ukraine. But and the reason is because we're going to have Starsky tomorrow, and that's always great to have Operator Starsky on and talk to him about what's going on over there. But we've also now we've booked a interview with a organization that deals with the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. They help train foreign fighters. They make contact with foreign fighters in other countries. They help train them and then get them to Ukraine and actually work with them throughout their entire tour in Ukraine. And God forbid something happens to them, also helps between the country of origin and Ukraine and with the family to help make whatever arrangements are necessary. And the one question I want to ask him is, why the hell would anybody do this? It seems to me like if you really want to be in the military, there are enough fights in most countries somewhere if you want to go there. Lance, why? In your experience, why do I'm going to ask this guy? I'm going to ask this guy why people are going to Ukraine. But still, and what are the odds that they're going to? Yeah,
it's why did several thousand people who weren't Spanish volunteer to fight on the Republican side during the Spanish Civil War? Because they saw Franco and the Germans and Italians who were helping him as the fascists they were. They were anti-fascists who mobilized. In fact, that's in large part where that phrase comes from. Antifa, anti-fascist, started in large part from those people who went to fight in Spain before it was popular. And why do you do it? Because you believe in the cause. Some people do it because they want adventure. I suspect that there are probably a few that do it because, they served in Iraq or Afghanistan, and there was a kind of, I don't know, adrenaline junkie rush you got when you were in combat like that, and here was a chance to do it again.
Yeah, when it comes to veterans of wars volunteering, another component of that is the very tight camaraderie, the brotherhood / sisterhood of being under that kind of pressure, under that kind of threat, operating together, becoming a well-oiled machine, even if you're just kind of a chunkily oiled machine. I don't even know what that means. It sounded good. Leave me alone. And when they come out of that, that's all gone. And you go back into like the civilian world, and that's not how the civilian world is at all. It's like I've never been in, I have technically been in combat. I was under no threat whatsoever. Afghanistan possessed no weapons whatsoever that could hit our carrier group. So, but we attacked the ever-living hell out of Afghanistan. So I'm technically a veteran of a foreign war. I have all of the combat ribbons. I was in combat, but I was under, and nobody was shooting back at me. We were just, like pointing out coordinates, pushing buttons. And in my case, most of the time I was tootling around inside of a box, showing us where we were inside this imaginary box in the middle of the North Indian Sea. So that's about it. But even in that particular time, right after 9/11, there was a big camaraderie between the crew that built up. When we came back and kind of, I got out right after we got back from that, but it's like that's not there anymore. And you can actually miss it. It's like as much as, being out at sea for literally 3 months straight, not putting into shore, sucked, and it sucked a lot, although it could have been worse. We could have been actually in the North Arabian Sea, which was considerably hotter, and we were coming into winter too. So, tooling around in the Indian Ocean was far better. It was much cooler, much better operating conditions, but we were still at sea for 3 months. We didn't leave the ship for 3 months, and that really kind of sucked. But even with all of the kind of suckiness of that going on, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure that being in actual combat inside of country was probably far worse. I can't even imagine some of the conditions you're carrying around 80 pounds worth of gear with you, and then somebody starts shooting at you, and now you got to try and run after you've been walking half the day. So yeah, I'm sure that, I'm not trying to say that this was absolute horrid, third world prison conditions that we were living under, but it wasn't pleasant either. And yet the biggest thing that sticks out to me about that time was kind of the camaraderie of the crew together. And it's like we didn't have very many problems with each other anymore. Suddenly when there's a bigger issue going on outside of yourselves, it's pretty amazing how quickly you forget about the issues you had with somebody, a month ago. So I think that for a lot of, especially combat veterans that might be interested in signing up for something like a Foreign Legion, a foreign fighting force, volunteers, a lot of that has to do with the camaraderie, the atmosphere of being that close to a bunch of people.
Well, I think it extends beyond combat. I mean, look at all the veterans groups that we have in this country, where you get, we were on this ship together, or we were in this battalion together, and people get together, every year or couple of years to, just see the old buddies again, kind of thing. There's a definite element of that, I think, that plays a major factor for a lot of people.
Well, I think I get that. It's just the mortality rates are the mortality. So I did a pre-interview with Mars, and it struck me that it seemed like the mortality rates for the foreign fighters that he was talking about was reasonably high. Now I'm talking to one guy who doesn't coordinate all the foreign legions in Ukraine, but in your are you excuse me, if you're aware, are they higher in general, are they higher in Ukraine, the mortality rates? And I mean, these guys are volunteering for frontline fighting, and we don't entirely know the rates in Ukraine. We're pretty sure they're being underestimated. You and I have talked about that. We've talked about that repeatedly. But what are your thoughts? I mean, it strikes me as the mortality rates. That's a brutal area to be in.
Yeah, and I think it also matters what unit you're assigned to when you start doing this, because if you're in a sector of the front that's relatively quiet, then mortality rates could be comparatively low. Conversely, if you're in a very active sector of the front, then it could be very high. So it's hard to say.
It also matters quite a lot. It's like what foreign fighter unit itself, what organization are you actually going under? You know, like the French Foreign Legion has a fairly low mortality rate. Even in Iraq, it had a very low mortality rate. You know, so it depends. Kind of, it's like, what is the organization actually doing? Is it really bringing people together and having them train under one thing, or is it and it has a training regimen? You know what to do. You know, and that they have all the assets required to make you an effective fighting force, or are they just saying, oh, here's a whole bunch of volunteers, give them some AKs and let them go at it? You know, I would imagine dump a bunch of people on the front lines like that, then, you know, they have no experience working together. They don't have unit tactics down. You know, that's critically important when you're in frontline kind of battle like that. So I think a lot of it's going to depend upon what is the organization and training for the, you know, program that you're volunteering under.
I think it's also worth noting that there are non-combat foreign volunteer parties that are in Ukraine.
Isn't there a really big medical one going? That's
oh yeah, there's a bunch of medics who don't want to fight, but they're there to help. Either civilians and or troops at the front. There are people who were deemed, for whatever reason, unfit for frontline service, but they were taken in and they're helping do stuff in the rear. You know, they could be, I'm just pulling this out of my head here, but they could be cooks, or they could be, you know, supply box counters or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that different people can do. So you can contribute without getting somebody to shoot at you.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's I'm looking forward to that discussion. So we're gonna I think we're gonna pre-record this one. We're concerned about the safety of some of the people we're going to be speaking with, and we don't want. So we're going to pre-record it, but. All right, I'm gonna. If you can think of any questions that you would want to ask Lance, so let me know, and I'll make sure they get in there.
Sure.
So we're gonna. I think that's going to be a good one. Then I'm going to have to do my favorite thing and video edit and trim the thing down. I think that'll be a good one. So one of the other things we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, we had a talk about favorite movies. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. But Zandring was not here for that. So I did want to, Zandring, one of your favorite books is The Last Unicorn. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, because you had a lot of insight into that I found fascinating.
Yeah, it's a book by Peter S. Beagle. Came out quite a while ago. And well, I think one of the reasons is I read it fairly young, and it was the first book I had ever read where the good guys didn't win. You know, I read fiction, mostly science fiction, fantasy. And The Last Unicorn is obviously a fantasy novel about the last unicorn and the quest she goes on to find the rest of her kind. And they made an animated movie of it as well, and it was actually the animated movie that got me to read the book. And the animated movie, the screenplay for it, it was also written by Peter S. Beagle. The dialogue is lifted directly out of the book. They changed very little. The biggest difference between the animated movie and the book is they left out many things that were in the book. The book is much more adult oriented. The animated movie was more targeted towards children, which really kind of makes me question some of their design choices. They gave rather large breasts to a tree, and this is supposed to be a children's movie. And so, yeah, it was
I
kind
remember
of
that
bizarre.
tree. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit bizarre, but they cut out all of the dark parts, kind of darker parts. So the book is a bit darker in tone. It deals with quite a few other issues as the unicorn walks along, but at the end of it, she kind of wins. But I mean, she completes her task. Spoiler alert: she completes her task to find out what happened to the rest of the unicorns. However, she pays a terrible price for it, and so it was the first book where it was like, okay, it's a very bittersweet ending to the book, and that had a pretty big impact on me. And it was one of the reasons why it made it one of my all-time favorite books ever, was because of the kind of the emotions, the feelings that it invoked when you got to the end of it. Everything else had always been, well, the good guys win. Yeah, it might be hard, and there might be a couple of characters that died along the way, maybe, but usually things turn out fairly rosy, and that's not the case for the end of the Last Unicorn. So it's got some pretty tragic things that happen to some of the characters in there. So that was one of the reasons that it fascinated me so much, and why it made such a big impression. And to this day, it's like I've got an audio. I have an anniversary edition of the book that my wife bought me. So yeah, I've got the animated video on VHS. I have like 12 copies of the VHS because at one point I couldn't find them at all anywhere. You couldn't get the movie. This was before widespread DVDs. So I found one place that had them, and I bought every copy they had. They had 12 copies. So I bought every single one of them. So I have like 12 copies on VHS. Well, then, of course, the DVDs started coming out, and they started, transcribing so many of the VHS movies on a DVD. Well, The Last Unicorn finally made it, and it's now you can go to like Amazon and buy it on DVD. And of course, I haven't looked for it on any of the streaming services because I have it on DVD and VHS, and I have the book. I think I have 2 copies of the book. My original paperback that I bought, and then the hardback limited edition or anniversary edition that the wife got me. So yeah, it's the only book I've got that much. I mean, there's lots of books that I really, really love. My absolute favorite short story I think ever written is by Brandon Sanderson. It's called The Emperor's Soul. Love that. I guess you'd call it maybe a novella. It's longer than just a short story, but so yeah, probably a novella. But yeah, that's what I really liked about the Last Unicorn, was it had a lot more darker elements to it.
So would you say that the book was better than the movie?
The movie is the book with, like I said, the only exception is they removed some of the darker elements. 1, for time. 2, because they were targeting it towards children as a cartoon, and they swapped the 2 events that happen in the book towards the beginning. And I think I know why. When you're reading the book, you got a lot more context to it, and you can kind of hear a lot more of the unicorn's thoughts. Now in the book, you can hear the unicorn's thoughts. They do that kind of echoey voice over type thing for her thoughts. But I think they swapped these 2 events to make it make more sense, easier to follow for children. And now it turns out, why does the unicorn end up leaving? And in the book, she runs into a butterfly, and the butterfly sings things that it's written. It keeps quoting things that it hears or is written down. So it comes off with these absolutely quirky things out of nowhere, like close cover before striking, just out of the middle, just says that. And it's like, okay, all right, off a matchbook, Red Rover, send Lucy right over. And so it seems to be saying all of these weird things that it had heard, and this butterfly makes absolutely no sense. And she asks, have you seen any of my people? Because there were some hunters in her forest, and they were talking about that the older hunter said, oh, we're in a unicorn's forest, we'll find no game here, we should turn back. And then before he leaves, he calls out into the forest, and of course unicorn is watching these hunters, stay where you are, for you are the last. And so she's absolutely puzzled by how can she be the last unicorn. So in the book, she meets the butterfly before she leaves her forest, and that butterfly is what prompts her to leave the forest. Well, in the book, she leaves her forest because what the hunter said bugs her enough, and then that's one of the first encounters that she runs into after she leaves her forest. So they swap that around. But like I said, I think to make children better able to understand it, and it has no real difference to the story. All of the elements of the story still happen. All of the dialogue is direct from the book. But they just cut some things out, I think, for time and for content. As far as I think that you get a much fuller and more vivid picture of what's going on, you get you get a lot more insights into some things just by reading the book, because there's entire passages. Like there's a maiden that goes out the day before her wedding with a golden bridle to go catch the unicorn, and that's a tradition that happens. And she goes out and sits in the unicorn. She's run into 𝗲𝗏𝗃 and 𝗲𝗏𝗃 at this point, or 𝗲𝗏𝗃. They haven't run into 𝗲𝗏𝗃 yet. And so 𝗲𝗏𝗃 is wandering around with the unicorn, and she just sits in this forest and stares at this girl all afternoon. And it's like all afternoon she stares at this girl sitting out in the meadow trying to lure a unicorn to her, because unicorns can only be touched and ridden by virgins, apparently. Which is why 𝗲𝗏𝗃 can touch the unicorn. But anyway, and he's like, well, why didn't you go to her? And she goes into this thing, well, I can't be deterred from my thing. And so, yeah, you get a lot of other things that happen that kind of give you a little bit more depth of, especially to the unicorn. So, which makes what happened later in the book when she finds the other unicorns, it makes it a little bit more poignant. So, as an adult, I would absolutely say read the book. But I would not hesitate to show the kids the movie either. Although, again, that damn tree with the gargantuan breasts that she tries to smother 𝗲𝗏𝗃 with, I just don't understand that, because the tree isn't really described in the book. It doesn't give a very good description of what this tree looks like beyond it's a large tree that 𝗲𝗏𝗃 gets tied to. So that was entirely the animator's discretion to make this tree look like this. And I just, oh my God, why? So they got some really awesome, it's got music from America in it, which, really awesome songs that they made specifically for The Last Unicorn. And it's a musical, so the characters sing in it, or at least there's two characters that sing in the end of it. And it's got Angela Lansbury, the guy who played Saruman. Oh, why can't I remember his name?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, the old guy that traps Gandalf on the tower. I cannot remember his name now. But anyway, he's in it. Christopher Lee. Thank you, Michelle. Christopher Lee is in it, and he plays such a good bad guy, even just voicing it. And before Christopher Lee passed away, he had already agreed there was a project to try and make a live action The Last Unicorn movie, and it's been going on since like 2000. So it never got out of like the pre-planning stage. They were just, this is the idea, can we get somebody? Then they had already gotten not Angela Lansbury, the voice of the Mia Farrow. They'd gotten Mia Farrow, who's the voice of the unicorn. They had gotten her verbal agreement to be in the movie, only she was not going to do the unicorn. She was going to end up playing the witch, Mommy Fortuna, or Molly Grew, one of the two, I can't remember. Christopher Lee had agreed to come back and reprise his role as King Haggard. So yeah, it's got Beau Bridges as the voice of the prince. So yeah, it's got it had some known names in the for voicing the animated movie too, but it never got any traction for making the actual movie a live action movie. Although I still think the website's still up and there. So, but like I said, it's been there for 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's hard to come up with a movie that is actually better than the book. I can't really.
It's so much harder. Well, I mean, the movies have the issue of how do you address internal monologue? How do you address books can describe something and set up tones that you just with words, because they can just come out and say it, and you can imagine it. Whereas in movies, they have to show it or they have to speak it. So it's like you only have sight and sound. You don't have your really imagination where they can just tell you things like the books can. So that's what makes it really difficult for a lot of really good books to be made into movies, because it's like, well, they're totally different mediums. And how do you convey some of the same things? And they did a pretty amazing job of it with the Last Unicorn for the parts that they included in the movie, in the animated movie. Mm-hmm. And like I said, everything that's in the animated movie happened in the book, and it almost all happened exactly as it happened in the book, except for those two events that got flip-flopped. Huh. They just cut parts of the book out of the movie, where they just skip over it entirely. There's a town that's at the foot of King Hagrid's castle, and that town is completely cut out of the movie. You never see it. It's never mentioned. Nothing is. So for the animated movie, that town doesn't exist, and that town's got a curse laid upon it, where no children can be born. So it's a childless town, and so it gets into a few dark areas as far as when you start looking into the metaphorical meanings of some of these issues that are happening in the book. And it's like, there's a lot more meaning to the book. I found more and more meaning I've read it dozens of times and listened to it a couple of times. And it's like every time I do, it's like I seem to find another layer of meaning somewhere. And that was one of the things that is one of the reasons why it has continued to be, if not my number one favorite book, it's barely tied with something else. I mean, that book is very, very well written.
Cool.
Yeah, I've been tempted to read it, but it would have to be long on my list of. I've got a long list of things to read, write, edit, and do. But along the you had said something that I thought was interesting about the. Or what you liked about it was that the good guys didn't really entirely win or necessarily win. And I do think that there's actually a negative psychological impact from seeing too many other Marvel movies where the good guys always win, where the people who die eventually come back in one way or another. So, I think fantasy and escapism to some degree is healthy, but I think you can get so wrapped up in it that you especially kids growing up, they don't realize, they start to think that this is really how life is. And when they start to experience their first trauma, they realize it's not like what they've seen in the movies. But along those lines, one of the books I've always despised the most, believe it or not, a short book, Little Engine That Could. And I think it's a great message, but it has to, to me, especially as a kid, it just made it sound like all you need is to believe in yourself and have to think you can and you can accomplish anything. And it's like, no, it's an important part of success. Absolutely. If you don't think you can do it, it's going to make it a lot harder to get things done. But in moderation, I think it's a good message, but that's not really. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking the book too seriously, but I hated it as a kid because I was like, no, you can't just think yourself up a mountain. You have to do work, and you have to, and sometimes you can believe in yourself all you like, and you can't do it. If I believe I can fly, jumping off the roof of my parents' home isn't gonna. Not that I would know anybody who's done that, but I'm just saying. Turns out,
gravity works.
Simply thinking you can do it does
Gravity's
not
just
mean
a theory.
gravity's just a theory. I know, no shit.
Yep.
Oh.
And interesting you should point that out, because I have a very, very similar love-hate relationship with my favorite poet, and probably the only poet that I really know anything about, and that's Shel Silverstein. He has a poem that I absolutely love, and I despise it. and the poem is "Listen to the Mussins." It's very short. I'll give it to you, short and dirty. I even have the damn thing memorized.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's listen to the mussins. Yeah, listen to the mussins, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves. Then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. That's the poem, and I love it for its inspirational tone. And it's like get that doubt out of your head and go after what it is you want. And on the other hand, getting out my sword. On the other hand,
Here we
it's
go.
absolutely
raining
bullshit.
hands. Yep.
Yes, it's going to start raining hands. It's absolute bullshit. Just not everything is possible. I don't care how much I believe in myself. I don't care how much. I am never going to be a professional singer. I'm never going to be a pop star or a rock star. I don't have the right sounding voice.
With enough money, anything can happen.
Well, yeah, that's true. With enough
There you go.
video editing, audio editing, sure.
Something that happened in this country between 2016 and 2020 is proof positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you talking about the tangerine that?
No, I would never say anything like that.
Oh, okay. My bad. My mistake. So money will change the math. That's true.
That poem actually prompted me to write a short story. I sent you that short story, but you didn't even have enough time to read it.
Yeah, that was a while back.
But
that was a while back. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it's about a frog that didn't want to be a frog and dreamed of flying like the birds. And so essentially he traipses through the forest to ask the birds if somebody can teach him, one of the great birds can teach him how to fly, and of course they all turn him down. And I'll spoil the whole thing because I don't think anybody that listens to this, is watching it now or will watch it in the future, is ever going to read that story from me. So I'll give you the big spoiler thing. He ends up, a sparrow decides that she said, "I'll help you," because he's despondent and depressed, and she comes out. It's like, "Well, I'll help you." And so they spend the rest of the end of the summer building a set of wings for him. And then he crawls up to the tallest cliff he could find in the forest, and he jumps off. And it's with his wings, and he's like slowly at first, but with ever increasing speed, the little frog plummeted back to the earth he so wished to leave. But then that first little jump, and he could feel the wind blowing by his face and the wind catching his little artificial wings, and he was soaring unfettered and free. And then he falls back to earth and dies. Because it turns out you can't defy gravity, and little frogs weren't, after all, meant to fly. So the little frog ends up falling to his death, and then of course all the forest animals who came to gawk at this frog who dared to try and fly, all kind of snub their nose up and are like, "Oh yeah, it's of course he was going to fail. Look at the folly of chasing the impossible." So and there's a little bit of a uplifting ending to it. I didn't just end it there, but I specifically did it that way. So it's like, okay, you can go after your dreams, and you can do everything in your power to try, and you can even have help, and you may still fall. It's like, and you need to be ready for that fall. So that my little interesting. You should talk about jumping off of the roof.
I do think we should rewrite the Silverstein want to basically like if you oh shoot, I was workshopping it in my head when McMillan said with money it's you don't need to or the little engine that could rewrite that one, and it's just like I've got enough money to pay for somebody to we'll call it Justin Bieber and the Great Wall of China. And basically, you can climb the Great Wall of China, even if you can't actually walk up it, as long as you can pay a bodyguard to carry you up the Great Wall of China. So that's I like this. I think we need to write this short story. It'll be complete fiction.
Well, it's like they used to joke about the F-4 Phantom. Give a brick enough thrust and anything can fly.
I just saw. I didn't realize this. So the 5th generation fighters, I guess when there was a big hubbub, and this was huge apparently, and I was just learning about this. There was a test done, and this is a great example. I'm going to memorize this for future debates and or arguments or discuss, because this is a great example of how and why you need to study the sources. Because I think it was the Navy did a whole bunch of engagements. I think it was an F-16 against a 5th generation fighter, and out of 23 of these engagements, the 5th generation fighter lost 22 of them. And one, I think, was another. It didn't win, but it wasn't counted as a loss. And so people are saying, why are we spending all this money on the 5th generation fighters when they can't even beat an F-16? And if you read the report, one of the things you'll note in it was that the reason the fighter lost was because it's a lot less maneuverable than an F-16. Like, okay, why are we having fighters that are a lot less maneuverable? And one of the problems was it couldn't get its nose towards the F-16 so that it could actually get a firing solution. Couldn't do it because the F-16 kept maneuvering around it. But I assume you understand the problem with that. Because
you're being forced to fight the 5th generation fighter as if it were a comparable 4th generation fighter. You're not taking advantage of all its advantages.
Yeah. The systems. Yeah, please.
Well, I was going to say there's a really famous picture. I wish I could find it, a copy to show you. And it was done during the early part of World War II, and the British were losing far more bombers to German fighters than they thought was appropriate. So they had some statisticians do this very careful plot of, all the planes that are coming back to the base that have been shot up, where were the bullet holes in them? And so they carefully plot this out over, hundreds of aircraft coming back. And they say, okay, you see where all those holes are? That's where we need to put more armor on the airplane.
That is incorrect.
Well, exactly, until somebody pointed out, he said, no, all those planes made it back. The areas where you don't see any bullet holes, guess what? Those are the planes that got shot down over enemy territory.
All those spaces?
That's where you need to put the damned armor.
Yep, all those places where there were very few or no bullet holes. That's what you need to armor, because they can get shot wherever all those other places, and they can still make it back. Clearly, because they did.
Right, but the issue is just kind of, as you were talking about, you impose your own limitations on things based on your view of the world. For my father is a perfect case. We got him one of those, what do they call them, dot devices that you put on your desk and, Alexa, turn on the lights kind of thing. And he's going at it with, basically 1950s era thinking. And so he's only taking advantage of perhaps 10% of this thing's capabilities for the things it could do for him, because he literally cannot conceive of the things he could do to make it work better. And a perfect example of this was, at one point it was like, I can't understand it. It's speaking too fast. I said, well, why don't you tell it to slow down? Well, that won't do any good. What do you mean? Just ask it to slow down. Okay. read slower. And it didn't. Suddenly everything was clear. You know, it's like, it's, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said the difference between science and magic is merely one of perception.
Or to I think it was Asimov to any society advanced enough would look like magic to us or to any
Any sufficiently advanced technology would be indiscernible from magic.
That's it. That's the line. Was that Asimov?
That's it. I
thought that was Heinlein's law.
Oh, interesting.
Well, the specifically what had happened with the and I think it was the F-35. What had happened with the F-35 was they had decided to disable. First of all, it didn't have since it was a testing F-35. It was right off the production line. Could do anything the other F-35s could do, but they didn't bother putting the stealth coating on it. So you could actually see it on radar, which you wouldn't normally be able to do, and you could lock onto it, which you wouldn't normally be able to do. And they had disabled the internal HUD that lets you see a full 360 from inside the cockpit. So while you're inside the cockpit of a F-35, you can see down, you can see behind you, you can see anywhere, and you can lock on a missile to anybody, anywhere, and for the full 360, because you can see them. So you can see somebody over there, you can just lock on to somebody over there. But because they had disabled it, the pilot could only lock on the normal front arc where he could normally see. So they turned it into an F-30 or an F-16 with less maneuverability. You don't need the maneuverability on the F-35 because by that they can't get behind. You could shoot at them even when they're behind you. They're behind you. You can shoot them down. And so once they said, why don't we do this test, but let it be an F-35. They repeated the test about 25, 26 engagements. It won every single one of them. But you have to, yes, please.
We were all wrong. It's Arthur C. Clarke. Said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Who's also the guy who, and Titan and I were talking about this. He was the guy who first theorized the idea of a geocentric orbit, so an orbit above the Earth that actually goes at the same rate. So the orbital speed is identical to the orbit of the Earth, so that you have to change the speed at whatever the altitude is, but at any rate you match it so that you are at the exact same spot over the Earth 100 years from it just keeps rotating and you're going with it. And that revolutionized communications, all sorts of I assume GPS is geocentric. I was going to say there's a communication system that NASA uses, but that one's not geocentric, and they end up having they do lose signal intermittently. But now I've spaced. Anyways, Arthur C. Clarke is absolutely amazing, and Titan was trying to get me to read more into who he was as a human being. Another thing on my list of things to do. I'm going to take after the please.
Oh, he also, I don't know if he revolutionized, but he was known for kind of laying out how to have, at least in popular fiction, science fiction, how to create a space station with gravity just by rotating it in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I also, one of my favorite lines to plagiarize, and this is we're about to do Inception on plagiarism, because I am plagiarizing a plagiarized line. Arthur C. Clarke, when he wrote 2000, I think it was 2061, if that was so it was 2001, 2010, then I think it was 2061. He had given away the rights to 2001. He didn't own the rights to that anymore. He was still receiving royalties, but he didn't actually have the rights, which meant he couldn't quote the book, because even though he had written it when he's writing 2061, he couldn't quote elements of the first book because it'd be infringing on the copyright. So he decided to he contacted the owners who held the copyright, and they actually started giving him a hard time about it, and he just decided to go ahead and do it anyway. And he wrote in the preface, I trust that there's going to be no hard feelings. I hope nobody's upset, but in 2061, I have to quote 2001. And if you can't plagiarize yourself, who can you plagiarize? And one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
And I say that one all the time, but of course, every time I say it, I'm plagiarizing Arthur C. Clarke.
Well, you're not plagiarizing if you give credit. So,
that's a good question. I'm not sure if that's true.
I think there's a point at which it becomes, because using that logic, you could literally copy an entire book word for word, and as long as you said, as written by George Klotz, you could now publish it.
Yeah, but
on your own
plagiarism
without having to pay anything.
Yeah, but that's copyright infringement, whether that's plagiarism or not. Because I think plagiarism, I think Xander may be correct. I think because I think that the definition of plagiarism is passing off another work as your own. That's the definition of plagiarism. Okay. He's right. He's right. Took me a second. Crap.
Yeah, you can violate copyright law left and right, but as long as you grant credit, you say, hey, Arthur C. Clarke once said, if you can't plagiarize yourself, who can you plagiarize? Well, you're not plagiarizing him because you said that who said that who wrote it. So it's like, you didn't plagiarize it.
I fucking hate having
you gave credit.
Sandring was right. And see, he's just sitting there quiet. He's like, no, Nick will figure it out. If he doesn't, I'll hit him with it. But he's just, I was like, fucking right. Oh, dear
Well,
Lord.
as Abraham Lincoln once said, George Washington only uses the internet for porn.
Allegedly.
That was I said that one last time. I think it was the Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't trust everything you see on the internet."
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Roman general sometime.
I got to speaking. We did a show on mental health, and I'd like to do one again. That show was one of my favorite shows, and there was a production fault, and we were never able to air it. We don't have it anymore. But one of the things that I find fascinating about mental health. So there's I was talking to a psychiatrist once, and he said, it's very hard because it's in some ways so bizarre until you understand the hows and the whys of it. He was in Massachusetts. Mental health hospitals were being closed left and right. And he knew his hospital was going to be visited by the state. And by the way I got to all of this, we were talking about generals, and I got here from Ulysses S. Grant, because I call this the Ulysses S. Grant syndrome. They knew that they were going to be inspected, and like the lowest performing 20 or 30% of the hospitals were going to be closed. So they would meet every twice a week to strategize how they would let everybody know when the inspector came, how they would get their best foot forward, that hide the little things that they don't want anyone to see. And they would meet in the basement, and in the basement, no windows, and it's where they held the comatose patients who hadn't moved or said or spoken or done anything in like 10 years. And they were all down there. It was a nice quiet area. They're all out of the way. So they'd hold these meetings. And one day, the inspector shows up, but he decided to come in through the back door, which goes right through. It goes into the basement and right through that area. And he goes there and then starts to head up to the first floor. At the top floor, they have one of the administration areas, whatever. A coma patient who hadn't said or done anything in 10 years runs up 4 flights of steps, goes to the top, comes out there and says, "The inspector's here, the inspector's here." He sits down for a few minutes. They start trying to talk to him, puts his head down, boom, he's gone again. Never spoke again. So how did that happen? how did this guy manage to, it meant that he was alert on some level and had been picking up this information while he was there, but he was actually able to function when a crisis occurred. Because if this place closed down, it would actually, so somehow, and this is one of the things my psychiatrist said, it's actually stories like this make people think this shit must be fake. Because it's like, wait a minute, when all of a sudden it's important, no. The fight or flight response kicks in, and the parts of your brain that aren't functioning normally, it either shuts down or finds a way to get them to operate. Ulysses S. Grant was the best example of this. The guy failed in business. He failed in life. And he was not an alcoholic. He was a fucking drunk. And the war breaks out, and it turns out he is one of the best commanders ever. And they go to Lincoln and they say, "You realize he's an alcoholic?" And I don't care. Well, you realize he's drinking whiskey like right now. Great. Tell me what brand of whiskey he's drinking, and I'll get it from my other generals. That was yeah. So and then once the war is over, and this actually ties right back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think, about maybe people who go to Ukraine because it fills a hole in their life to be fighting. But anyways, Ulysses S. Grant, his brain operated. It worked, and it worked well. I'm getting I think it's coming from his Xandering. There's some background. Okay, thank you. His brain could only operate in a crisis. And by the way, there are people like this they're people who have to fabricate. We've all seen this, right? We've all seen people have to fabricate crises, but it's not, sometimes it's because they like drama. Sometimes it's just because they love drama. And sometimes it's because if they stop with the crises, they can't function anymore. They have to be going from crisis to crisis to crisis because they got two modes, crisis mode and can't get out of bed in the morning. Anyways, I find this very fascinating. I saw you shaking your head, Lance, so I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on this.
No, I agree with you. I know exactly the kind of people you're talking about. Yeah, they function well in a crisis. There's, of course, the other side of that same coin, which is people who, in a normal situation, are absolutely brilliant, but the moment a crisis arises, they become utterly worthless. They just kind of go, oh, and don't know how to react, can't think clearly under that pressure. So it's a matter of, who's best suited for the role at a given time.
Well, and it's interesting to see who blossoms in a crisis, because sometimes it's the people who they were the wallflower, and they just can't operate, and then some of it seems to also have to do. It depends because it's different things for different people, but for some people it's bandwidth. Some people are actually capable of handling a greater amount of bandwidth of information than they get on a day-to-day. A significantly greater amount than they get on a day-to-day level, and so they just kind of turn their brain off, and they just don't function. And then when that bandwidth starts to get kicked up and used, and they start getting information because there's a crisis, they start having to process things. They start having to, all of a sudden, boom, like everything, they have energy, they have, boom, and they're just all of a sudden, they're there and present in a way that they've never been before, because now it's lighting up their brain in a way that it has. I have a BA in psychology. That's it. That's not a advanced degree by any stretch of the imagination. But this is one of the topics I find fascinating.
I ran into an interesting. I ran into an interesting thing. I was talking to somebody who was a psychiatrist in Seattle, and one issue that I had brought up to him was. I was a little bit concerned because there have been 3 instances where something life-threatening had happened. And one of them had happened fairly long ago. My nephew had aspirated some peas and stopped breathing and turned blue. And another one happened to me. I don't know if anybody watches the Weather Channel, there's a show called Highway Through Hell. And it's about the 𝗂𝐚𝐥𝐿𝐴 Highway and the Crow's Nest Highway just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. And I drove up and down the 𝗂𝐚𝐥𝐿𝐴 all the time. It's Highway 5, goes to Kamloops. And one evening, coming back, it had started snowing really, really bad, and I have a set of double trailers. I'm grossing over 100,000 pounds, and I start down this 10% grade, and I lose all traction, and I start on a free slide down the mountain. And it seems like when a traumatic event or something like that, where your like fight or flight instinct would kick in, I lose all emotion. I go like completely dead and calm through the entire thing. And then when it's all over, I like collapse. And I was asking him, it's like, what's going on? It's like when I went through that free slide down there, 100,000 pound truck out of control, sliding down a mountain, and it's straight down on one side and straight up on the other. It's literally a road carved out of the side of a mountain, and there's a river all the way down at the bottom. And through the whole thing, I was very calm. I knew exactly what I wanted to do and what I was trying to do, and I kept the truck in a straight line. And I finally got through they call it the slammer in the area. There's a snow shed that goes over the highway. And when I finally came out of that, it's like there were 3 trucks that I passed that had jackknifed into the center barrier, and I barely missed hitting those trucks. They did the exact same thing happened to them that happened to me. But by the time I came out of the snow shed, I was doing almost 50 miles per hour. And this is a 10% grade. You don't want going down to 10% grade at 50 miles per hour. It's like the truck is no longer in gear. So yeah, so I'm bad thing. And yeah, well, the road starts turning to the right, and of course it's wintertime. There's huge snowbanks on the right hand side. It's like, well, I'm turning to the right. It's leveled up enough, because every time the road banked, my truck would slide down that bank all the way to the bottom of the road. So and that's what happened to the 3 trucks at a jackknife. They slid in, the road was banked because it was making a slight left turn. Well, because they were in a free slide, they just slid straight down that slope and into the center of the road, into the barrier, and tore a bunch of stuff up. Well, I managed to miss them, but I had the same thing happen to me. I slid down. I managed to keep the truck and both trailers, because I had double trailers, in a straight line, so I didn't end up jackknifing the truck. But like I said, I was doing 50 miles per hour when I came out of the snow shed. And so when I started making that far right, I'm like, okay, well, I've got like a 200, 300 foot drop to the river to my left, and I've got the edge side of the mountain to my right. So I made a right turn into the side of the mountain, and just drove right into the side snowbank. Well, interestingly, because of the way the truck is designed and the fact that I was making a right turn, and there's off tracking on trailers, so when you make a right turn, the trailer actually ends up farther to the right than you are. So as I'm going around this, I dragged the trailer into the snowbank. The bottom of the truck, along the wheels, along the steps to the side of the truck, are all make contact with this snow wall, which it's been exposed, so it's heated and cooled, so it's got a sheen of ice, and it's become very hard packed. So when I hit that, it was an incredibly effective brake, and it brought me to a stop very, very fast just by turning. It's like if I've got to decide what I'm going to hit, do I will drive off this road into the river 300 feet below me, or do I drive into the side of the mountain, and try and stay upright? I opted for the mountain. Stopped, it worked out, did no damage to the truck or trailer, shocked the hell out of me. This whole time I am calm, I'm thinking very clearly, I know exactly what I want to do, and I'm cataloging all the problems that I had, because I ran out of air pressure, and our brakes run off of air pressure too. So that was why I wasn't in gears, because I had to put the truck in neutral and floor it to spin the engine fast enough to build up enough air pressure to release the trailer brakes so that the trailer would stop sliding. So this whole thing is going through my mind but once I got done, I sat there for a minute, looked around, and realized nobody's passing me, nobody's coming up the other way. It's like, it's eerily quiet. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess let's see how badly I just damaged the truck and the trailers by diving into the snowbank. And I opened the door and went to step out of the truck and just collapsed. I couldn't stand up. I was shaking so badly. It was like all of that adrenaline just suddenly dumped at once. And I was and that happened the same thing when my nephew aspirated. The whole time, it's like I had no emotion. I wasn't reacting whatsoever. I was very calm. My mom was like freaking out at me because I sounded so nonchalant on the telephone. I might need an ambulance. My nephew stopped breathing. And my mom's like freaking out. She's like, could you maybe put some urgency in your voice here? And so I asked the psychiatrist what this is about, and he's like, well, there's actually a small percentage of the population where this happens to, and it's a very dangerous thing, and you need to be very aware of this, because your body delays all of that sudden adrenaline response, and it's all suppressed. It's all happening, but it's suppressed. So when you get to the end of that and the crisis has appeared to have been over, you instantly feel all of that adrenaline that has built up into your system. It's because your receptors are no longer being suppressed. It hits you all at once, and you have to be very careful because it can cause you to have a heart attack. It's that serious. So you need to be very, very careful, and you need to, it's like when you stopped at the end of that sliding down the hill and you sat there for a minute and just kind of breathed a couple of times and kind of looked around to take stocks, like that probably, I hate to say be hyperbolic about it. It's like, but that could have potentially saved your life. If you had immediately tried to jump out of the truck, you might have had, because you already said, you collapsed on the ground. It's like all of that adrenaline dumped and hit your system at once, and it just shut you down. And that it can shut your heart down if you do that. So you need to be aware of that. So I have this really weird thing that's kind of life-threatening. It's like I'm fine during the crisis. Once the crisis is over, that's where I'm in crisis, because my body goes completely haywire.
That's like what we were talking about earlier, too, the people who can't feel pain and just how immensely, their life expectancy is significant. If you just remove somebody's ability to feel pain, they feel everything else. They feel joy, pleasure, they feel contact on their skin, they feel their clothing, they feel all that stuff. Cannot feel pain dramatically reduces your life expectancy by like 50%. But actually, before, we've got a question in live chat that I want to hit, but I did want to ask Commander McMillan, because I've been thinking about this. I've heard, and it seems to me that this is somewhat the case, and we saw that. So in Ukraine, there have been a lot of accidental shootings of Russians against other Russians, and I was wondering. Some of it we know is criminals who are settling scores, debts. It's incompetent people who didn't realize that their rifle was the safety wasn't on. They mishandled it and shot and killed someone else. There's been a lot of shit like that. But the other thing is, there are people who think that in a crisis they'll be fine, and who are very, very competent in everyday situations, and they're probably extremely competent in training. But then when there's a real combat situation, are that kind of blathering idiot. And if you're on the front lines, there's only so many ways you can deal with that. How do they deal with that? Is that are they really going to? They had an accident, or are they going to try to move them to the back? Can they move people to the back while they're in the middle of? What happens in a situation like that?
A large part of that would go to a professional NCO corps, the senior enlisted guys who've been around long enough to know how to react in situations, what to do with people like that. Do you pair that guy up with somebody who's competent and you can trust, or do you keep him in the back where he isn't going to do any harm? All of that's something an experienced person who understands these things would be doing. And as you know, we've talked about this before, that's something that's missing in the Russian mindset for their militaries. They don't have a professional NCO corps. So when you get, Yvonne with a bad propensity to just shoot at anything and everything whenever he gets scared, what do you do with him? What can you do? You don't have anybody who can tell Yvonne, hey, take a hike, dude. And worst case, they're going to say, oh, Yvonne, you go out in front.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is you could well have a situation where if you have somebody who is truly incompetent, is putting the rest of you at risk, and you don't have the kind of unit cohesion where people are trusting of one another because you don't have that NCO to build that trust. It could be that, yeah, Yvonne, you go out in front and see if the bad guys are there. Oh, darn, I accidentally shot Yvonne. You know, that all of that plays into the game here. And I don't know what the situation is with the Russians, but yeah, they're going to have a higher rate of friendly fire incidents because they're poorly coordinated, both from the lack of those NCOs, but also, as we've gone over a number of times in our other sessions, because the Russians don't have a unified chain of command. So is Yvonne part of the unit you can tell what to do or not? You know, if Yvonne is one of the Luhansk militia guys, yeah, you can do what you want. He's not really, he's an unperson, to borrow an Orwellian phrase. Conversely, if he's Wagner Group, he could just tell you, no, I'm going to do what I damn well feel like and ignore you. All of that plays in.
I do want to ask about the Chinese surveillance over the U.S. I'm not actually all that concerned about it because Marjorie Taylor Greene is on the case, so I'm sure.
Oh, I'm so reassured.
Yeah, well, no, I wasn't concerned about it until I heard she was on the case. Now she'll find a way to turn it into a certifiable fucking nightmare. But we actually got a really great question on the live chat.
But she has those space lasers pointed at it, so they've got it covered.
Wow. What was the actual space laser that was used? And someone was like, it was this Jewish space laser. Oh, I think it was the attack on what was it? The attack on Iran last week, and somebody was saying that it was actually a Jewish space laser. But so there was a question from Assembly of God: should we reduce trauma in society, or is trauma a necessary evolutionary byproduct? I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious as to you gentlemen what you think.
Let's not all rush to answer this at once.
Yeah,
let's take our turns.
The way I would express it is, it's all nice and good to be callous and say, oh, just let the people suffer trauma. It's good for the breed, but you can only feel comfortable saying that if you're not the one experiencing the trauma. If you are somebody who is experiencing trauma, you probably want that trauma to stop right then and there.
I remember I had a friend who was taught pottery. And one of the things that she would do is, wow, this in my view, this was really messed up. We actually weren't friends after this once I found this out because in my view, wow. What she would do is force all of her students, who were all usually campers at a summer camp, to break the very first piece of pottery that they made. And she wouldn't tell them, so they'd make the pottery and then she'd break them. Why? Well, because air bubbles do develop in clay, and you're going to lose pieces, and you're going to lose some of your favorite pieces, and it's impossible to know when it's going to happen. You can, knead the clay well and make sure that you reduce the chances, but it can happen with anything that you make. And so she wanted to prepare them for that by forcing them to suffer a breakage of the very first piece that they make. This is utter insanity, in my view. You're going to suffer enough tragedies in life. There's no reason to either not try to mitigate it or to try to inflict more in order to insulate people against tragedy. There's the Hobbesian state of nature, which is life is cold, nasty, brutish, and short. And as Isandering has mentioned more than once, we could return to that very quickly. An EMP pulse, 80 miles over Kansas or over Delaware?
Oh, it's a couple hundred kilometers above Kansas.
Above Kansas. And the entire United States is reduced back to the Hobbesian state of nature overnight. Is that going to happen? Well, it hasn't happened for a while, and I don't know. You should be prepared for eventualities, but if you spend all your life, preparing for worst-case scenarios, you're not actually living. The whole purpose of society, the purpose of civilization, is to overcome the Hobbesian state of nature. And, we live longer, we're happier, healthier, but even that's somewhat debatable. The average level of anxiety for human beings is rising, the background level of anxiety. Why? Because we weren't designed to sit at computers all day long. We have outlets for this. We have, computer games, we have movies, and they actually, I think, serve a psychological purpose to allow us to witness and engage in some level of trauma, but safely, where we can disengage because we know it's just a movie or a story. If it turns out that, we end up back at the Hobbesian state of nature because civilization can collapse. It has collapsed. It collapsed in France when the food riots happened. We've seen modern civilizations collapse. It's rare, but it does happen. If it happens, we will regret not experiencing more trauma and being uber prepared like the Spartans. If it doesn't happen, we will regret being overly prepared and paranoid. I err on the side of live life. We don't know what's going to happen. We have done a very good job making life easier for absolutely everybody by trying to reduce trauma as best we can, trying to increase longevity, increase human comfort, and that may end up to bite us in the ass if things head south quickly and generations aren't ready for it. But you can't prepare for every eventuality. We do our best, and in the meantime, build society as best we can. That's my answer. Are you going to say something, Lance?
Nope. I tend to agree with what you're saying. Like I said, I think it's a case of, are there negative aspects to not allowing trauma to happen? Sure. But again, it's easy to say that from the comfort of your own well-heated home, watching the internet on a computer that is powered by electricity conveniently provided by some, municipal power source. Start whittling all those aspects down, and people very quickly become less likely to agree with that line of reasoning.
Well, and there is another example because as a parent, and I think you guys feel this way too, you can't mitigate every trauma for your child. That's actually a great way to create a monster. It's like an instant monster right there if you give your child everything they want and if you mitigate any and all suffering. They do have to, I think making sure that your children have realistic expectations leads to a well-rounded adult. But I think that is a different set of circumstances because you are dealing with a human being that is not aware of what is a realistic expectation or not. And at that point, there will necessarily be the trauma of growth. I don't think that's avoidable. I don't think human beings can realize that they are not the only creature in existence and not suffer some trauma as a result. And that is called growing up.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that you can actually it's a laudable goal to try and reduce trauma because trauma doesn't usually lead to good things. But human beings evolved, just like you said, in the Hobbesian state of nature. We evolved living through a great many traumas, and some of them are pretty significant. It's my personal opinion that as society has progressed, the things that cause us trauma have become, or that reaches that threshold of trauma, have become less and less and less. So more minor events are causing the same kinds of trauma as a lion attack on a village and wiping out 3/4 of the population, including all of your children and your wife or your spouse. So there's quite a lot of very tragic things that human beings lived through, and there certainly are mental coping mechanisms that have evolved with us. Whether they really work most effectively or not is debatable, but I'm not sure that you're going to get rid of trauma, because the more bigger traumas that we seem to eliminate, more and more minor things seem to be causing trauma as well. I mean, you can look at people have meltdowns over some of the stupidest things, and so I'm not sure if you can, or if that should even. I mean, I hate to say taken so out of context. This can be taken so out of context. I'm not entirely sure that you should.
Hold on. I gotta call Abu. Hold on a sec. All right, good. Okay, go.
Yeah. Yeah, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I got Abu on the line. We're good.
There's certainly some traumatic things that we should absolutely try and to mitigate. You know, human trafficking of children in the sex trade, for example. You know, we should absolutely be trying to eliminate that. But I think that it's a fool's game to try and eliminate trauma from society, or try to eliminate somebody from going through trauma, because I don't think you can. Now, hopefully I'm wrong. Maybe we can eventually reach a state. I don't think that will happen in my lifetime. I see no evidence to support that we could eliminate trauma in my lifetime, not with human beings being the way they are. It's just, I don't think that's a particularly productive endeavor, not only from just resources, but also from a mental health. You know, there is a certain amount of stress that you should go through in order to grow. I mean, that's how we change behaviors. Is, you know, people don't generally change what they're doing until what they're doing becomes more painful to them than their perception of the pain caused by changing. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, the saying, the way that you get rid of the poor is to make them uncomfortable in their poorness. You know, it sounds so very callous, especially if you're not poor. I mean, if you're sitting here going, okay, well, I'm poor and I'm pretty damn uncomfortable, and, you know, this is bullshit. Yet that we use those negative feedbacks to change behavior. That's just kind of how things work. And it's like, that's why when you put your hand on a stove and it burns you and you're like, oh my God, that hurts so bad. You know, it's a very negative feedback and can be traumatic to a child. And you can guarantee they will never, ever touch a stove again without double, triple checking that it isn't on, you know, which leads into one of the reasons why people who can't feel pain have such a shortened life expectancy, because they don't get those reinforcements. You know, one of the hypotheses about why pain hurts so bad, like you break a bone, and some people are like, oh my God, they're in blinding pain, it incapacitates them.
Yeah, but the extended logic that you're putting forth there is that we should all be taking our kids' hands and holding them onto a burning stove to teach them not to do that in the future.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm not advocating for that.
But that's exactly what you basically have advocated. That's the point.
No, I'm not advocating you do that.
I think you are. By extension, that's exactly, no, you didn't say that, but that's what your implication is when you say something along the lines of, well, if we just don't take care of the poor, they'll get off their asses and get jobs. Bullshit.
Well, yeah, I think
I said that right at the end of that was, you know, that's so easy to say when you're not poor, and it's when you are poor, it's like, wait a minute, that's a whole bunch of bullshit. And all I'm saying about it was talking about putting the hand on a stove. Why you don't do that anymore is because nature has, through evolutionary processes, we've developed pain receptors, and one of the reasons pain hurts so bad is because that's nature's way of telling you to never do that again. That's why it hurts so bad when you do something like that, like when you break a bone. It can incapacitate
you. My question: if you never touch that stove, you don't know that touching the stove is dangerous. So there's education where you tell your kid, hey, don't do this.
Absolutely.
This could hurt.
Which is why I said there's several traumas that we should absolutely try to mitigate, but I don't know that you'll be successful, because when you get rid of some of the bigger traumas, well, I mean, accidents are always going to happen. So
there's
can't get rid of all of them.
There's a difference between eliminate and reduce and eliminate and mitigate. And I think that's the key takeaway to this whole argument, is that no, we're never going to eliminate trauma, but we can go and try to do things that mitigate it and limit it so that fewer people have to experience it and fewer people have to experience the full depth of that kind of trauma.
Well,
we absolutely should try.
A good point there, which is the one problem is our own adaptability, right? Which is, I mean, the expression, first world problems, where you sit there and you think about these terrible, terrible, terrible problems that you have and how awful. And people, during the Great Depression too, people who were still living better than 90% of the planet were, stockbrokers were jumping out of windows, even though they still had far better lives than almost any human being ever to have lived. We adapt to circumstances, which does make reducing or eliminating trauma on that front very difficult. I also would agree, as Andring, that you're correct in terms of the reason we have pain. There's a very specific reason we think we shouldn't have it, but it appears to be the only way to motivate us to alter behavior, whether it's it's one of two ways, because you can be driven or you can be pushed. It's you can be driven or you can be pulled. It is a pull away from behaviors because it's a negative, what's it called? Negative reinforcement. You move away from whatever it is that's causing the pain. So that's why we have pain. I also want to quickly touch on one thing, but because I have a question I want to ask on a different topic, but I think the poor example that you used, that would require its own show. You and I have had that discussion before, and I think you brought up some very, very good points. That's one that I think again, nuance. Yeah, this is why I called it.
It's incredibly complicated.
Oh,
so
that's for sure.
We can have a show on that, and that I think be an interesting discussion. But I think there's too much to unpack in that one for tonight. So, another good question. Somebody keeps asking all these good questions, and it's derailing from other questions, and which of course isn't to derail, but it's just funny. Is trauma real or imaginary? Both. It depends on the context, I suppose. No, it's real. Actually, I don't think there's any way you could say it's imaginary, because people can give themselves trauma over imaginary things, but that doesn't make the trauma any less real. Trauma is trauma.
Yeah, haven't they used CT scans to actually record the areas of the brain that light up when traumatic things happen to you? I mean, it's a complete biochemical reaction in the brain when trauma occurs, and it's like, if not permanent, very long lasting changes to the brain when trauma happens. I'm pretty sure I was reading somewhere an article where they were mapping that, where they can see it in real time when they're doing brain scans on somebody.
Yeah, it changes away. It changes away a number of neural pathways fire. And because a neural net is just that, it's a network. When you make any number of significant changes, it actually has an impact on everything. Neurons that fire and are responsible for completely different systems way down can actually feel the effects of that change. The rewiring from the trauma, you can kind of go back. There's neuroplasticity. You can work your way back to where you had been, but that takes a lot of effort and practice, and it's usually the changes are in a very small area, but they can be quite pronounced when you experience trauma. But it depends on how you process it and what the trauma was. It's been a while since I've studied any of this, and 𝗏𝗏𝗆 would know far more than I would. So, but I wanted to, because I'd like to get going reasonably soon, but you had said earlier, and I had spaced this, and somebody brought it up in the live chat, that you've been having a very good discussion on the Discord, and that you guys have been talking about a lot, and I was wondering, Lance, if you might be able to expand on that. Was that the China thing, or was that...
I don't know exactly.
Right
just
in the green
general
room, you had said...
comments.
Oh,
okay. No, just there were a lot of different discussions going on on the Discord channel, and a lot of it had to do with things like we'll discuss a number of them pertaining to the situation in Ukraine, a new U.S. missile that's supposedly going to be transferred to Ukraine for use, and stuff like that, and the fact that there's some evidence that people have been trying to broker a backdoor deal between the Ukrainians and Russians, and that seems to have gone nowhere because neither side is willing to talk and stuff like that.
Well, that's not entirely true, and we've had this discussion before. I think you're overly pessimistic. Russia has said they will absolutely talk as soon as the Ukrainian government disbands, and Ukraine has said that they will fully negotiate with Putin once every single troop leaves Ukraine. Admittedly, it seems like there's a large gap there, but come on, where's the optimism?
That was kind of my point.
Oh, you're always like, oh, well, they just, just because neither of them are willing to budge from their initial starting positions. Well, I guess that does mean that they're not willing to negotiate. Okay, yeah, you might have a point. You may have a point there. I stand corrected. Well, okay, so let's talk. We will be tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern. We will have Operator Starsky on again, and look forward to that. We're going to also probably mention we'll talk about that later. We're also going to be doing a show on the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. But the China one, we did have a question about the balloon in China, and nobody seemed to be too bothered by it. It doesn't, the balloon in China, the Chinese balloon landing in the U.S. What do we know about that? What are your thoughts on it?
Honestly, as first I've heard of them having these balloons, so it kind of caught me off guard when I read the articles. For those who don't know, apparently a Chinese manufactured surveillance balloon, whatever that is, came down in, what was it, Wyoming, I think?
Montana.
And was recovered, and everybody's kind of going, wow, look, the Chinese are spying on us. It's like, when haven't the Chinese been spying on us?
Yeah, I mean, come on. Everybody has TikTok. That's owned by the Chinese government. And you're worried about a space balloon?
How dare you imply that all those dancing teenagers are actually working for the Chinese intelligence agency?
I know. I'm just such a horrible person that advocates children burning their hands on the stove to learn not to touch the stove.
Oh, there we go.
Well, and In Time now has a TikTok account, so I guess we're being spied on as well. We're now In Time, brought to you by President Ping. Thank you all for I got another good Assembly of God's asking some I like the questions. One more question. I'm going to answer this, and then I think I'm going to head out. I think we've got plenty of energy, but I am going to need to get going. So the other question, back to trauma. Do you think? What are the best strategies for overcoming trauma? I think there's any number. Titan pointed out. Depending on the reality is, once you've undergone trauma, you never go back 100% because you still have the memory of that trauma as well. You still have the fact that your pathways, you were once triggering pathways in that way, means they will always fire faster than they had previously. Those muscles have been exercised. There's a very cognitive behavioral way in which you cannot physically undo that. You can, move them kind of back to the way they had been, but those old pathways will always be susceptible to re-triggering in one way or another. But the one thing that the other question was, does belief in a higher being help? I think irrefutably yes. Having both been a believer and an atheist for about 20 years each, or a little more than that, about 20, 25 years each, I found being a believer was very helpful. And I don't think it's a reason to believe. I think you should believe things that are true, not things that make you feel good. But in my experience, yes, if you believe in a higher power, you believe in an afterlife. It's helpful because it reduces the trauma, right? If you lose a child, but you truly believe you will see that child again in the afterlife, you are committed to that belief, you 100% believe it, it mitigates the loss.
Yeah, or that it was God's plan, so it's all appropriate, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the child is in heaven living the best life ever, so it hurts for me, the child's gone, but they're doing so much better, they're in a great place. Of course, you do that with death all the time. They're in a better place now, and it helps us get through grief a lot better, thinking that they're on their cloud playing their harp and looking down lovingly on us, waiting for the day that we can come join them. So all of the most successful programs for, like, say, addiction, all seem to involve belief in a higher power. The ones that are actually have the highest success rates, they all have that in common. So when it comes to trauma, I would imagine that belief in a higher power would be helpful, because that's something that can unite people together as well.
I point out,
well, as Marx might say, have some more opium.
Well, I mean, Titan pointed out that there's lots of strategies that can help. And, we are not doctors, we are not psychiatrists, and Time is not making any recommendations whatsoever, just making a mere observation that opium does seem to help, or heroin does seem to help.
Yeah.
We never said it was the heroin of the masses. We said it was the opiate of the masses.
And that begs that. I mean, the reality is, though, of course, it hasn't actually helped with the trauma in one sense, which is it reduced what the trauma was. So it wasn't a strategy for coping once you've been traumatized. What it did was it reduced the level of trauma, because if you don't even have to lose a child, right? You just have to believe you've lost a child. So let's say you think your child is dead. That's a huge trauma. If whether or not the child is dead is moot. You think the child is dead, that's a huge trauma. If you think the child has been moved to heaven, and again, you will one day see them again, that is not as traumatic. It is still a loss. It will still affect you. It can still cause depression and many other things. But it's not the same trauma. So are you coping with the trauma better by having faith? Or is it that you're just not experiencing the same trauma? Because those two people are not experiencing the same trauma. It's not that they're coping differently. They're experiencing different traumas based solely on perception of reality. And that is a very nuanced point, and not a necessarily meaningful one under most circumstances, but I think it's worth pointing out that in that sense, it's sometimes you refer to it as a coping mechanism, but it's a coping mechanism in the way that Lance, I think, did it, which is, again, God has a plan for everything. So it's right. And Titan says, as of 40 minutes ago, actually, I guess the thing wasn't downed. AP says that it was being tracked. So this is what happens when I'm not on the Discord for 40 minutes. Oh, dear
tisk,
Lord.
Tisk. Shame on you.
I know. Well, if you haven't joined Schrodinger's child, oh, dear Lord. Oh, my God.
The child doesn't actually have to be dead. You just have to believe they're dead.
Well, no, the child...
Well, open the box and find out.
Yeah, the child isn't... Oh, dear Lord. All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. What I'd like to do is... remember, everyone, please come join us on the Discord. We're going to be discussing, and we have a psychology section for these kinds of discussions. We will be having Operator Starsky on tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll talk about that missile, because I do have some questions about it, and a number of other things then. And in the meantime, if you like, subscribe, that really helps us out. The reason we YouTubers all say that isn't because we enjoy saying it, or it's a shibboleth of being an actual YouTuber. We say it because it's true. It has an impact, so we have to sit there and beg for likes and subscribes and views, because it really helps us out with the algorithm. So thank you all very much. Any final thoughts, anybody, before we bail?
Your name is a golden bell hung in my heart. I would break my body to pieces to call you once by your name.
Well, thank you, Xandring. I feel the same way about you.
Well, I just figured we'd go back to my favorite book.
Oh, okay. That's where. Okay, that's Oh, that's what's his name? That was the wizard. Took me a minute. All right. I thought you meant that about me.
No, actually,
you know what? Never mind. Never mind.
The butterfly said that to the unicorn, because the unicorn asked the butterfly, be a little more respectful, butterfly. Do you know who I am? And his response was, "Your name is a golden bell hung in my heart."
No, that's okay.
It's you and me, Moth.
I get it.
Hand to 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 hand.
All right, I get it. It's not me. I get it. I'm okay. I'm not disappointed. All right, all. Thank you all very much, and we will see you on the Discord and see you tomorrow for Operator Starsky. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Take care.